All right, folks, welcome to part 2 of HDR cleanup and prep. We are going to, this time, do our cleanup and extraction of each individual light using Julius Ihle's plugin, the HDR Prepper, or Gizmo that he created. Again, this is his Gizmo, so I'm not posting it anywhere. I'm not posting this script anywhere. It's really, I will send you the links in regards to where you can download it off his website, but is definitely well worth a training tutorial. He does have a tutorial on his website, but there's no sound. There's just text at the bottom. But I think this definitely needs to be examined because it's a powerful tool. For those of you that are getting into lighting and you want to, work like the professionals in regards to setting up lighting and so forth. So we're going to be going over this process where we start with an HDR. Again, I'm using the one from the previous lesson. You could see that we come over here and we do some cleanup of the ceiling here. And it does it just does a better job of cleanup throughout this whole workflow. You can see now I got this area cleaned out with the light coming in from the sun. So we're mixing a lot of temperatures here, incandescence, fluorescence, and daylight. So it's just all over the place. But kind of cleaning this up, and then the ability to extract all of these lights individually to be put on cards. And again, he has worked in production at big major studios, and I believe it's been a while since, I think it was like over 4 years ago that he's had this plugin out in circulation, and people seem to really like it. But it is meant for production, just to get you going, so to speak. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at his website. And again, we interviewed Julius a couple weeks ago, so check out Ask the VFX Pros. Absolutely awesome guy, incredible. I believe he does have some donation area on his website. I highly recommend you just give him a tip if you really like this plugin. It's really, really cool, and it's been very nice of him to put it out for us. So here you can see there hasn't been really an update since 2014, but I can tell you this is an incredible plugin. So I will link this at the bottom. He does mention in here that it'd be good to download environment Convolve in your Nuke, scripting and so forth, or where you need to have it up ready. I actually downloaded it and just used it separately. You don't necessarily have to have it installed to have this to work. It's just a last process thing. I actually do the environment Convolve separately, which I'll show in this demonstration. He does have a video here to explain everything, written with text at the bottom. But I can tell you that I think what I'm going to try to do is really do my best to explain it a little bit more. It's a great explanation, and it really is clear, and I got it, obviously, but I think it'd be nice to just explore this a little bit more. So the actual gizmo itself is this little button right here. You can see get the gizmo yourself, click here, and that will bring you to something that looks like this. And again, I would open this up in Chrome, not Windows Explorer. It has to be in this sort of scripting language, as you can see here. So just, all you got to do here is just grab it all, right? Copy it, and then go into Nuke. And here we are in Nuke, and I'll just Control V, paste it, and it comes in with a mask input and a 1 input. So the very first thing you do is obviously bring in your HDR. And we are ready to go. Now the first thing you want to do is take a look at your HDR and just find out what resolution you're working with or conforming to. 537.6 by 2688. What you want to do is immediately hit S for settings in your node graph. Come down here and set this to your full-size format. So I found that if you don't do this now, you're going to have problems later on because the rotos are not going to be set up correctly, or you just got to go through some extra headache, so to speak. So it'll be the last input. You can't see it off screen here. But 530.76 by 2688 is what I'm using, so that conforms it to the image like so. So the first thing I'm going to do is take care of some areas that I think I could probably use just a little bit of work, and that is going to be this light right here. I don't want its influence to be playing a part. So it is a reflection of a doorway that's on the opposite side. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a roto and just do a quick kind of roto through this little area right here, and I will drop in an exposure node. It's also important to take a look that the HDR has been, it looks kind of darkly here, very darkly lit, and again, you have different intensities of light, and it's trying to balance those out equally. So we'll bring up the brightness of the HDRI eventually for the final export. So I'll put this to exposure, put this to the Roto node, and now I can take the exposure node and start to bring this down a little bit. So I'll put my viewer to it. Now you can see we're starting to get the HDR detail, and my values are like at 0.1. If it's between the normalized values of 0 to 1, you should be pretty good. You might want to sample the local color here and say, okay, this is like 0.02. So maybe I'll bring the exposure down pretty heavily, and that should be good enough. You know, you're not getting values higher than 1 here. And then you could also, if you want to, add a blur node to blur your, you know, the actual outline here. So again, I'll come over here and just bring this up like that, maybe. Again, I did get a chance, because he's a very awesome guy, Julius, and kind of walk me through this a little bit in regards to questions. And one of the things he said was when they do eventually project this information onto photogrammetry geometry, as a character, you know, maybe you have like a spaceship that moves around and so forth, comes up against the wall and it should be occluded in shadow, or maybe it comes near a light. It's never a perfect match as far as the projection, spherical projection onto the actual geometry. So again, that's just little bits of cleanup. And then if you feel that you need to come in here maybe and do a little roto paint work, so if you find there might be any lens flares, that might be something. If you're going to do a I don't know, if you're doing something in the form of, how do I say it? Like, you know, you're going to have some chrome character walk through your scene. You're worried that they're going to see the lens flare or something. Again, you can bring up the brightness here, exposure here a little bit, and you can do maybe a little bit cleanup to get some of these lens flares out of here. Like you can see, this is just a general flare, and you can come over here and just clean it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. In regards to something that most likely will not be seen. And let's see if I can get, yeah, am I using cologne here? What's going on here? Not sure what I'm doing wrong here. It's working. That's weird because those colors are very, very dark. What is going on? Anyway, well, I'll just leave it for now. I'm not too worried about it. Okay. So the next step is going to be the need to clean out this light up here. So we're going to jump into a Spherical Transform. And I discussed this last time when I talked about cleanup, just using the clone tool. We have to set some settings here. We need to put this to input type to lat long. So we're going from lat long to lat long. And the input we're going to rotate by 90 degrees in the right here in the X. So I hit that, and now we're looking straight up, and we can see the light right here. So this is where we're going to start to introduce the HDR Prepper light. So let's go ahead and plug this in and take a look. So just keep in mind that when we're, you know, transforming these, they're being filtered through cubic, so there is just a slight loss of detail in this process. You can see if I take the Spherical Transform and I copy it after the fact, or just go off to the side here, and I'll invert this. So this one was 90 degrees, and we'll just go here and add a negative to that, like so. And you can see, if we take a look at the version before, right, and we go to the version after, you can see there has definitely been a loss of quality in the process here. Now you can also, you know, some people prefer to use like Langzos 4, or, you know, if you want to, you can do your filtering that way. It's totally up to you. Usually HDRIs, like I mentioned before, are usually slightly blurry, but if you want sharpness, that's going to be a quality maintaining through the whole process. So again, here we are looking straight up. And now I'm going to go to this HDR Prepper, and we're going to create a roto for the mask. So I'll plug in the mask, and we'll jump over here to an ellipse, and we'll just cover it like that. Now, the question is, what of this do you want to actually have? Well, it should probably be the light source itself, so the actual physical light luminance information here, as you can see here. So we can go ahead and do something like this. You know, and it's just, this center area, if you want to omit this, you can use a key for this. If you want to use keying to extract these lights, we're going to be doing that in a little bit in a second here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of shorten this up a little bit and try to get this shape as long as possible there. So there. It's important to note that there's two different things going on here. There's you putting masks in, and then over here is this little bounding box little thing over here, and this is what's going to do the workflow. You can see if I just move it off the side, nothing's happening. There's no affected workflow. This is actually just extracting the data in regards to what we're going to talk about here, which is like an edge extend workflow that's going on behind the scenes. So with this HDR Prepper, you can hit the letter S and go in and see the setup that Julius has made here. And this is probably good learning details. You know, as we were talking to different guests, they were talking about how they would spend their time actually just investigating scripts and see how they were built. This is probably a good idea, but I'm not going to get into that too much there. So we'll go back to our main node graph, but the little S right here is definitely something to take a look at. What's important to realize is when you do extract these lights, it's going to try to create a square image based on the actual roto itself, okay? The influence of the roto itself. And then everything else will be alpha'd out, okay? So that's just the light itself. And that'll be a square extraction of the light itself as we kind of go through this. So the light itself, we're going to go ahead and name it. Each one of these we're going to name independently. So in this case, we will call this the overhead circle light. All right. Now the output folder, we can go ahead and set this to a specific folder. So I'm going to do that right now. So just plug it like that, and we can, let's put this on my desktop here, or let's make a new folder, stuff, and say open. Now there is this button called set all to this folder. So if you have another one of these off to the side here, right? And let's just say I have this blah, 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 you know, whatever. You could see if I go back to this one and say set all to this folder, we come back over here to the HDR prep, you could see that it's officially changed this. So if you have multiple HDR preppers in here, it's going to do that for all of them that are currently in there. All right. So it's going back to this. You can see we have a light render. We have this render button. We're going to get into that a little bit later. And then the environment HDR output is basically going to be what is going to be written into the physical write node that if we say create environmental output. So for instance, if I come in here and call this, you know, final diffused, let's see, yeah, I need to learn how to spell here. There we go. So final diffused, and you can see if I say it has a couple options here. Environment Convolve. Here's that environment Convolve. It's not turned on. You can change the format here, so you can just say keep input format, and if you say create environment, it's just going to, all it is just building a write node. So you can see it's putting it to that folder that we want. That's about it, and it's just an EXR sequence. If we come over here and decide to choose it to a specific size, where we turn this off, and usually HDRIs don't have to be that big, so we could do 24 by 15. We can create, it just creates a reformat node, which is reformatting it to a specific format and writing it. Again, these are lat long formats, so they're going to be 2:1. So you're going to see the resolutions being 256 by 128, blah, blah, blah. And again, Convolve, environment Convolve is basically a blurring the actual object here. So I can come over here and turn on environment Convolve with the exponent 10 to 40 and say create. I get an error message. I'm not sure if I don't have it installed correctly or something. But what I usually do is I'll turn off this, say create this, like that, and then I have environment Convolve installed. I'll take that, and we will put that, you could do it before or after, and then you could see if I put my viewer to it. And it's going to take some time because this is a very heavy node. And you can see if I take this and bring it up a little bit, it'll be less blurry and so forth. But this is seamless on all sides. Some people usually have their diffuse HDRI with the lights extracted, slightly blurry, depending on if you need that. So again, it's basically just creating a rate node. So if you're aware of what that's all about. So with this, again, the HDR name, we're not worried about this right now. I'm just going to leave it as is, and we're going to move down to the workflows. Now this has to be actually in the area here. But keep in mind, as I mentioned, this Roto defines the shape that's going to be extracted when we extract the file. So it'll be like that square image. It'll crop it. Now, if you want to, you can actually come in here and fade this out a little bit if you prefer by holding down Control and feathering this out. That's fine too. It's going to crop based on what you see out here as far as the bounding box. All right, so back to this. Now let's get into the workflow here. It has default edge smudge areas here. So this area obviously is area defined by the square. The edge smudge, we can take this down to 0 and 0. We'll take the edge extend to 0, edge blur to 0, details to 0, detail blurs to 0. So what this technically is sort of like an edge extend based on exposure. Or I'm pretty sure it's what it is. So you can see I can come in here and just extract it in. And then you will see that we can come in here and start to smudge this. So we can do it with width and height separately, or we could turn off this 2 here and just start to extract it in. Now we have to take the edge extend and put it into a negative value. So it's pressing out, it's grabbing the information. If you guys have seen my tutorials on edge extend, it's basically the same thing. You're just pulling the information and streaking the information out like that. So you can see as I make adjustments to this, it's basically pulling from the data that's over here and replacing the data in the middle. So you can see like this. So again, if you do move this, it's going to adjust this. So you might want to do that. And then the size of this bounding box, if you have it, it's going to clip it. So make sure you got enough of the information to grab from. It's only sampling this area, so the things are not expensive. You could sample everything in the scene, but obviously Julius has optimized this so that you're just calculating this area right here, so to speak. And then you have the edge blur, which you can do this. Now the really cool thing is you could do rough edges, which gives you sort of like this kind of rough pattern of edges, like a noise pattern. So it's not like a perfect spherical reality here. And then you can play around here. Now the details are cool because you can bring back details and then blur those details if you want to have a little bit of an imprint of what was once there, you know, something like that. So if I hit the Q, you can see I got a little imprint. Again, you can come in here and adjust this as best as you feel, you know, whatever. And you can see if I sample the data here, we no longer have values that are really high. So if I disable this, see the values are at the 4, right? If I re-enable this, we get values that are pretty good. Okay, so not the most perfect job, but a job regardless. And again, don't be afraid to come in here and start to pull these little window edges out like this. Play with the blur a little bit. Let's see if we can try to, yeah, something like that. So yeah, I mean, whatever. It's good enough for what we're doing. Again, you could do some paint work if you prefer. All right, so now that we have done that, we are going to spherically transform this back. So again, I just copy and paste this back here. Try to get as much as you possibly can get done without transforming this a million times. Remember, you're taking a quality hit every time you do this. So I'm just going to do a -90 and push back. So now we're back. And if we take a look, we've got the ceiling cleaned up. And the last 2 things we're going to clean up is this area here with these 3 lights, and then of course this here, which is pretty much the outdoor light, probably the brightest information. You can see if we come over here and we sample the colors, values are relatively high. You're looking at 5 or 6 in super white values here. Now I want to, at this point, move over a little bit and basically move this information over here. Now, because I have a spherical transform, these should, if I'm not mistaken, should concatenate. And concatenate means there's no quality change if I do this twice. So if I come over here and copy and paste this, and I do one more transforms, I can't do the transform. I could technically do the transform on this, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna use a separate transform. And this transform is going to set everything back to 0, so nothing's changed. And I'm just going to rotate this scene over so that this edge is not so close to this edge. I don't want to have this over so much. Something to keep on, in mind when you're on set, so that you're not kind of clipping this information. Again, that's because we've been rotating this around and it's been kind of conforming it. So I could come over here and rotate this in the Y direction here. And so I can get all of this pretty much centered pretty well here. There we go. Okay, so with that said, we can now move on and do another light. So again, we're going to take an HDR Prepper. I usually just copy and paste this one like that. And turn our on setups here like that. And we could also hit the make a Roto node here. And let's jump over to here and we'll just draw out a Roto. Again, I have a very large file size here. This is like 5,000 by whatever, 5,000 by something, 12 megapixel. All right, so there it is. Again, not the most perfect workflow. If you wish to, you can do this. Just do a little bit of a kind of extraction like that. All right, and then of course we got to bring this baby over here. Make sure you're doing one of these at a time. I usually put my properties bin to 1. Double click to make sure I'm not using the same exact node, the same prepper node or whatever. So again, I'm going to get this stuff pretty close. And we are going to see what happens. Okay, so let's kind of dive in here a little bit. We're going to take all of our, I usually like to just start to dial this stuff back. And this is where we're going to take the actual workflow here, which is the edge extend. Again, you can do edge extend and edge smudge with 2. So we can take these and click 2 to each, right? And we can start working on these eventually. So let me do maybe a smudge of 13 and 13. And we're going to do a horizontal and not a vertical. So again, width and height. Height, we're going to put this to 0, maybe 2. We'll do 2 and 2 here. And then the actual edge extend, we're going to go ahead and extend that. Again, you'll get used to this where you're just like, the smudge is kind of smudging things together. And see how I'm actually just smudging things vertically as opposed to, I'm sorry, left to right as opposed to top to bottom. Say, so come over here, play with, as you blur this, and then the details you can bring down if you wish. You can also come in here and fill in a color. So you see the color node here. You can, if you want to, you can grab this and sample a color here. So we'll just grab this and sample a color. And you can say fill with that color, and it just fills this up. Kind of like blank and would look weird if you had, like, again, a Chrome Terminator 2 running through your scene. It would see this, and your audience would be like, why is that like that? So again, not necessarily something you want to do. That's good for filling in television sets. So in Julius's demonstration, he shows a bunch of TVs and how you can fill it up with a dark black color if the television is actually on. So just be aware of that. So I'm going to extend this up a little bit. Pull this out a little bit. There we go. And we are going to rename this light, obviously, to outside window light, like that. And we'll keep kind of pushing. Again, sample the colors. You can see the values are nowhere near the values that are before this. So if I disable this, you can see we got some the values are really high, like level 6. But kind of close and shop, you can see what's what. And then the details you can bring back if you want to kind of give the idea, and detail blur, just kind of give you the sense of, something there in case it gets caught in reflections of your CG. So I'm going to bring this up a couple here, and then our edge extend. That's good. And then we could decrease this yeah, it's pulling from a lot of stuff here. And then we can blur this a little bit if we wish. And again, the blur detail, you can just go like this. So now we've kind of not the greatest extraction. The image itself looks a little strange. But you can see the difference here between the two. Again, a little bit less obvious than when you do really splotchy clone work. That can be just kind of like, right? So, and last but not least, we're going to take this and, actually just going to take this one and copy it once more. And we're going to move our way over here. And in this case, I am actually going to just do a quick workflow here. And we're going to do a keyer, just a simple keyer, luminance key. And we're going to hit the A for alpha and start to extract these lights. And again, anything that's in here is going to read out as transparent. When we actually, as a transparency in the EXR, when we put these lights into Maya or whatever. Okay, so with that said, I can come over here and just do a quick merge node. By the way, I probably want to clamp this. So just go ahead and clamp it. Put a merge in here. Right. And we will take this and do a mask. So we cut it out. And so that's our official mask that we will plug into here. Pull this here. And then here's our new, and we'll call this the 3 tungsten bulbs or whatever. And bathroom, right? And let's go ahead and just go back to this. And we got to, of course, just kind of rebuild all this. We got to move this stupid square thing. Not stupid. It's not stupid at all. Just to kind of get it over here. And that should be it. Okay, so now you can see it's using the transparency there. And again, we don't necessarily, we can actually start to basically not edge smudge and edge extent from top to bottom, not left to right, because we're getting the door kind of getting transparent here, as you can see. So what we can do is come over here to the edge smudge, and again, I could just click on it, and let's take the details down and the detail blur down, and we'll take the edge smudge and get rid of the vertical. Let's see, or maybe the width. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So we got the width going, and now we can go ahead and increase this or decrease it, whatever. Go with the edge blur. It's never going to be perfect. You can bring back some of the details here. You'll get that kind of ghosting effect. Sometimes I think it's good to actually see some kind of remnant of what was there, because you'll be placing your lights near those areas when you project it on a geometry that's been from photogrammetry. So getting some kind of ghostly reality in there does help when you're kind of placing these things. And again, you can just play with all these settings and so forth. So that's pretty much it. It's not really that difficult. We have 3 specific lights. The only other thing I didn't show you is set selection to this name. So if I have another one of these lights, so here's the current light I have, right? 3 tungsten bulbs. If I had 3 separate, which you should do maybe, if separate these into 3 separate extractions, is I can take this one, right? And you can see it says set selection to this name, right? So what I can do is, if I have this selected and I just double click this and I grab both of these and I say set selection to this name, you can see this one says bulb bathroom 1 and this says bulb bathroom 2. So you can select all of, if you had 3 of these lights separated, you can rename them into 3 different things. In this case, we only have 1, so I don't need to put a 1 at the end of that. Okay, so we are pretty much prepped and ready to go. It doesn't matter which one of these you use to create the right node for the final, what is called the diffused. And this would be considered our diffused workflow. And we're going to bring on an exposure node, because this is basically the ones where the lights have been extracted. So I'm going to put an exposure node at the very end here, because this is rather darkly, very dark. So you can see the values are very, very dark here. If we take a look, what are we at? We're at like 0.01, right? So if I take the exposure and bring this up, put my viewer to it, that might help. I can start to get a diffused look of what I would consider to be the ambience. Now, you might have to come in here and make adjustments to this. This color is still very, it's still normalized from 0 to 1. The values up here don't go any higher than 1. It's when the values go over 1, then you got to start thinking about maybe bringing them down a little bit, because they will emanate light in a 3D app. All right, so then with that set, I can take any one of these HDR preppers, doesn't matter which one, and we can do our good old create environment output. So I'm going to choose a 2048 by 1024, and let's say create output. And all I do is just put this at the end of the workflow. If I want to add a convolve, again, for me, I have to go ahead and create environment convolve. I will put it in here, and I will put this up to maybe 59 so you can see the final write out. Let's give it a couple seconds here. This is a very expensive node, by the way, just so you're aware. There we go. All right. So this is seamless. It's going to work really well. That might be a little too much, so I might bring the exponent up. Let's see if I can. Maybe just a little bit of blur. So again, smaller size, more compact. It's not necessary to have such a high resolution image for that. And then we have all these from which we can write out. And they're all set to the subsequent folder, which I talked about before, which was stuff, right? So here you see the final diffuse. So if you have the plugin set up to, obviously you can do render all, but I'll just do these individually. So I'll go to this HDR Prepper, and you can see the little button for render, right? So I'll go ahead and hit render, and 1:1, hit OK. And we're going to go to this HDR Prepper, and we're going to hit render, hit OK. It's rendering 1:1 frame. Come to this one. It's based on the names here again. Render, hit OK. And then we go to this right node and just say render and hit OK. All right, so you can see here is our 4 different, you can see the naming convention, final diffuse, 3 tungsten bathroom, outside window, blah, blah. We can throw those in just so we can take a look at them in here. So you can see that it looks like my mistake. The actual cropping was based on the actual the actual bounding box that we use. So my mistake, folks. But the transparency is based on your actual roto for each of these. So if you want to optimize this even more, you can close it down. So if we take a look, here is our environment diffuse. Here is this light, and you can see the transparency of that. And again, each one of these, you know, if you were to come in here and just look at the exposure, it's got all the 32-bit high dynamic range information, and has a unique shape as opposed to what you've had before. So again, you could see the alpha information pulled out, and all of this stuff can be brought into Maya. So here in Arnold for Maya, and again, the professionals are using Katana Arnold, but it works on the same reality that you have a bunch of area lights, and you see I've kind of taken these lights, and I don't get a visual representation inside of Arnold in regards to what these look like, so I had to kind of guesstimate by scaling these lights around a little bit. But you can see I scaled them accordingly, rotating them accordingly, and used this mirrored ball inside of here to do this. All these lights are area lights that are plugged in with the color information plugged into the actual HDR. So what you get when you actually render is a accurate reality of the lights themselves, the shape of the lights, the different broken up intensities of the lights. You can see there's the light itself. I kind of zoom up on this, kind of get in here. And again, I haven't done anything in regards to projecting the actual spherically projecting the actual diffused HDR of the environment in the scene yet, but that would be like, for instance, this geometry would be the photogrammetry done on set, but you can see the physical lights themselves, and you can adjust their different intensities and so forth. And it does play a part when you start to get into such things as, say, atmospherics. So here you can see atmospherics turned on in Arnold, and you're getting a different, different shape of just atmospherics by themselves, kind of forming the atmospheric reality of the scene. This is a little bit too intense, obviously, but you get the idea that so much of the reason why folks in Hollywood are using these, some would seem to be extreme examples of accuracy of lighting, but that's the whole point, right? To get as accurate as possible. So again, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I do have a video coming up on how to workflow and render layers set up with live action footage and photogrammetry and all that stuff with free photogrammetry software. to, you know, project that HDR, diffused HDR onto geometry and all that. So keep an eye out for that. And I'll see you guys later. Again, special thanks to Julius Ihle. Go to his website. Give him some donations when you obviously download this. And again, I can't provide this anywhere, so all you can do is look for the links below and check out his awesome site.